Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. The first item on our work session agenda is a request to use the retail space at 60 West Washington Street. Amanda?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hello. I have Michael Chilcutt with us today. He's the Smithsburg High School principal, and he is requesting to use 60 West Washington Street to display a dissertation that he is working towards through Frostburg State University. So without further ado.
Okay. Hello. Thank you. Well, not starting out very well here.
You're not the only one who has issues. I said you're not the only one who has IT issues.
Okay, there we go. Well, let me start with just thanking you for considering allowing me to use the space on 60 West Washington. You want to? By way of introduction, I'm really here speaking not as, I am principal of Smithsburg High School, but I'm really here as a doctoral student at Frostburg. I will be defending late March, early April. So while I'm here, I want to share my proposal, and I'm a little nervous, sorry. Never done this before. And then I can't get the technology to work. There you go. Okay, so give you an overview of the dissertation. I'm doing a fairly non-traditional dissertation where I'm doing what is a art-informed self-study of my leadership practice. So basically, and I skipped over the part where I was an art teacher and still practicing artist. So a big part of what I'm doing in my dissertation is essentially doing a leadership action in my role as a principal. Then I go critically reflect on the action by doing about four different ways. The one most direct to the show is my own personal reflection. So I go deep critical reflection on my own work using art I've created. An important component of the whole dissertation is at the end the transparency that's created by displaying the artwork. So that's why we need a space to do it. The proximity of 60 West to the campus is perfect. Ideally, what I would like to do, if this can all work out, is defend in the building, or not the main building at the campus, but the building beside there in an office or a classroom space, and then take people that are at my defense down to look at the artwork. So that's the key. Again, this goes back to the method. The means of critical reflection is basically you have the individual level, which I've used artwork to do that because it's a big part of who I am. Deep reflection gained through another committee, so you're going a few more people, so individual to a small committee. Next, you have a larger committee where you have more people who are knowledgeable about leadership and knowledgeable about art, who will give feedback on the action. And then finally, this is where the gallery show comes in. So the exhibit gives an opportunity for sort of the general public to see it and give me feedback on the artwork. So the dissertation isn't really finished. The research isn't finished until we've had a chance to get that more universal level of the dissertation, if that makes sense. And I know this is probably different than what you've heard of in dissertations in the past. So we know that it is, and it's not unprecedented, but it isn't your typical sort of propositional hypothesis based. We're building the data as it goes. Get over there. So again, I don't want to get too redundant here. So basically what happened, went through 3 phases. So one, leadership action, critical reflection happens. I make adjustments, go to the next one, go to the next one, goes 3 times. So we went through that series. Artwork created for this. All the artwork in this show will be created during the time of the dissertation. So here's where the part where there are 4 series of 12 artworks. So each of them is done in a little different way. This series of artwork, which are the actual reflection paintings, so these took place over 3 rotations, 3 cycles. So I do the leadership action, do a piece of it, and then do the next leadership action you're doing. So a big part of the way I think, which is important, is to do it through artwork. So that's what these represent. I had no idea what these would look like at the end of the process, and that's part of the process. You start with things, and I know these are maybe not your traditional, it's not a landscape, it's not, it's a very contemporary art. So that might be a little challenge to some people that haven't seen art this way. But so these are part of the reflection. This is a couple other examples. You can see the text. I mean, one of the key issues that came up in the dissertation for me, as far as a leader, was the dilemma between democratic leadership of giving my staff some input and the structure needed. So as you can see, as you work that out visually, you can see very loose textural things, and then you can see the grids that were put on top of it. The next series is a series of another 12. These are small series. Chapter 2 in a dissertation is a literature review. I've used text in paintings since I was undergrad, for 25 years now. And I wanted to use the text from the actual lit review in there. The idea is these phrases, these paragraphs are things that they're actually in the dissertation. So again, these will be 12 things, and they're tied to different concepts. In there, the full one is, again, that's, I'm using the APA citation, the full in parentheses 2006. That one deals with lateral capacity billing. That's a big concept in it. Key aspect of a self-study is what's called living education theory, which probably the simplest way to explain that would be a personal mission and vision. So what are my key values and principles that I want to use? So that's what that is. Now that again is something that evolves over time of the dissertation through the 3 cycles. So these paintings represent that. And again, you could see, well, in the last one, you could see the text that's embedded in there. These paintings occurred over 7, 8, 9 layers of painting. Just keep, like each rotation, you just keep doing more and more until you end at a point and say where it is. And probably I'll continue to tinker with these until the show. I mean, because you're going over it. The grid patterns are something I've used for quite a while. Again, since I was an undergrad, using the grid patterns in paintings, having an idea of the structure. You can see some text in there. That's text that comes from the living education theory. The dialogue paintings, this is the last ones I'll share with you. These came out of, through the leadership actions and part of the collecting the data for the dissertation, you do a transcript. When you go through the transcript, I started mapping the interaction between people that were in the transcript. So say if we were doing a leadership action and our conversation, as I was looking and coding the transcript, I started seeing patterns of conversation come across the table, if that makes sense. What I did then was that pattern, if you can see the ropes, those became actual patterns of conversation that occurred throughout the transcripts of the dissertation. So we were creating dialogue, talking about whatever. That's where they came from, and they're tied to whatever. And I forget what this one's called, but they're also coded as like leadership action 1.4. So the idea then also is you're taking things that have nothing to do with each other and you're putting them together and you're building something out of nothing. So you're creating something out of it. Same idea as a dialogue. You guys will be talking later and you're going to create a dialogue here and it's going to be the same idea. You're going to come up with new knowledge, new ideas. That's the idea of that series of painting. So, I don't know if I got. So basically what I'm asking is to use the space at 60 West. Today I'm here to seek approval. The way I would look at the timetable would be basically the March 1st and 2nd, which is a Thursday, Friday. Set up the show in that space. If you allow me to do it, March 3rd, we'd have some sort of opening. At that point, I would be gaining feedback from people from the 3rd to the 17th through ways, probably do like some sort of, I have a Google environment connected to the whole dissertation, so you could show up and give your feedback on a list of questions there. So that gives me more of that feedback. That's how that happens. So, and it would remain open through probably April 14th. So, and that's, I don't know if you have any questions. So, any?
I'm good.
Thank you. We asked for the presentation because there was a very esoteric to try to understand what you were presenting when we looked at it first.
Yeah,
And I appreciate it. It's very interesting.
So-
And I'm sure you have no problem getting an approval.
Okay, all right, thank you. So, anything else? Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Give them consensus that we're good with
Okay, to next week.
it. Did we give consensus that we're good with it? We already
All
given
right,
consensus.
going over the preliminary agenda review. As always, if you have any questions, please stop me as we go through it. I'll call the regular session order. Councilmember Elshire has the invocation. We'll do the pledge of the flag. We'll have our announcements. Meeting dates in February are February 6th, 13th, and 20th. The work session's at 4 p.m. February 27th is the regular session at 7 p.m. We'll have the oath of office to the new council member. Can I go ahead and say who?
Well, I mean, it's your call, but
we
last
called
time you
him.
called
You
somebody.
did contact him, but
We
we didn't call
contacted him,
anybody
yes.
else. Yeah, Your call.
Maybe I'll think about it. We'll have citizen comments, we'll have the city administrator comments, we'll have the mayor and council comments, and then we'll adopt the minutes of December 5th, 12th, 19th, and the 21st. Under the consent agenda, IT and support services, Munis transparency, module renewal for Tyler Technologies Incorporated, Dallas, Texas, for $11,330. Under Parks and Engineering, Prospect Avenue Crosswalk, Concrete Central LLC, Hagerstown, Maryland, $79,400. Rodney, are you in here? So this is gonna be just that strip between Forest Drive, which is right there by the triangle, on that side, on the north side, over to Woodland Way, because those two houses that are there, they don't have a sidewalk.
Right, so this project puts sidewalk there, and then it builds a flash and beacon crosswalk that students that are walking to North High could push the button, and, because it's what we would call a mid-block crosswalk. There's not a stop sign or anything there for vehicles, so it's a beacon to allow them to cross safely.
And the property owners are good.
Yes, we've talked to them several times. And it was requested, the genesis of the project was from the Neighborhood First group.
Right. Okay. New handicap ramps, SSC Corporation, Silver Spring, Maryland, not to exceed $103,000. 2018 Ford Escape to replace Unit 70T from Hertrick Fleet Services Incorporated, Denton, Maryland, for $21,287. And a change order to pavement marking contract for additional work, Alpha Space Company, Control Company, Inc., Chambersburg, PA, for $23,000, and that is over in front of Bester Elementary. Correct?
Some of 3,000 of it is, and others is just random markings throughout the city, just maintaining them.
Okay. Under the police department, expansion of iRecord system, McEnroe Voice and Data, Hunt Valley, Maryland, $10,961. Under Public Works, renovation of the Maryland Department of Labor License and Regulation, tenant space at 14 North Potomac Street, Carpet Consultants Incorporated to replace carpeting for $59,002.50. Actual approved amount, including contingency, is up to $70,000. Under utilities, electric, replace a digger derrick truck number 120, Altech Industries Incorporated, Plains, Pennsylvania, $207,500. Also under electric, clean up disposal of the PCB oil spill, Clean Harbors Environmental Services, Lower Maryland, $25,274.17. Under wastewater, installation of roofing system at Digester Building at Wastewater Treatment Plant, Height Associates Incorporated, Cumberland, Maryland, for $52,000. Also under wastewater, a Ford F-250 vehicle number 500 from Keystone Ford Chambersburg, PA, for $37,979. Questions so far? No unfinished business. Under new business, the approval of resolution and the easement agreement with Review and Herald Publishing and Atlantic Home Construction on Oak Ridge Drive. Approval of resolution, license agreement for use of the elevator in the A&E parking deck. Approval of resolution, lease agreement with Maryland Occupational Safety and Health at 14 North Potomac Street. Approval of resolution, revised contract with MHA Audio for the 2018-19 Western Maryland Blues Fest audio and staging services at a meeting today with the Blues Fest leads, Jill and et al. And good meeting, and we'll have an update soon, very soon. Thank you. Approval of a resolution, Community Development Block Grant, Homeownership Guideline updates. Approval of a deed to convey land to Salem Point Investments LLC. Approval of Hagerstown Suns fireworks schedule for 2018. You're only doing 5. Wow. Yeah. Approval of a lease to supply golf carts for greens at Hamilton Run. Approval of memorandum of understanding with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources for prevention of emerald ash borer damage. Approval of stormwater utility proposal, which we'll discuss this evening. Approval of mutual aid agreement with Frederick County. And the approval of Memorial Park inductees, which we will discuss this evening also. And we're going to add the lease agreement for 60 West Washington Street that we just had. Are there any questions on the consent agenda in next week's meeting?
On the mutual aid agreement, is there, I see it's between City of Frederick, the Washington County, and the City of Hagerstown. Any reason why Frederick County Sheriff's Department wouldn't be included in that memorandum? And one of the reasons I say it is from just casual observation, it seems like we probably have as many Frederick County Sheriff deputies living in the City of Hagerstown as they do in Frederick County. There's a lot of Frederick County deputies that live here and have their vehicles here. I'm just wondering why
Chief?
we wouldn't include them.
We've used Frederick City. We haven't had participation from the county. It's part of our partnership with those agencies. We work very well with Frederick City and everything that we've done, whether it be sending people to their academy, et cetera. We have the same, virtually the same memorandum of understanding with Cumberland. It's important for us to have those agreements in place in case we have to go operational.
Totally understand.
Yes.
I completely agree with what you're doing. I'm just
Sure.
wondering if it would behoove us to see if the Frederick County Sheriff's Department wanted to join in down the road. I mean, I have no problems and wouldn't hold this up for anything, just.
At this time, I don't think they do.
Okay.
But we will,
And
clearly.
That's fine. I
Sure.
was just curious.
Good. And just so you know about the agreements is, we always want to look forward, because obviously if something were to occur, whether it be in our jurisdiction or other jurisdiction, we need to force multiply with our agencies and be able to attack something professionally and operationally. So the agreements are very good for us. As you know, the Sheriff's Office and us work very well together, and that's why we have these additional entities, because you have to look down the road. It's too late if we need resources, when something happens. That's why we do
Good
it.
job. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else on the consent agenda or next week's meeting? All right. We'll move on to the Memorial Park Circle of Achievement recommendations, class of 2018.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Steve.
Just to give the public watching and our new council member a little bit of an update, the Circle of Achievement is basically an outdoor Hall of Honor of past Hagerstown residents who have done remarkable things. It was created 4 years ago and we kickstarted it with 12 initial honorees, and each of the 2 years since, 2 additionals have been added. And it's now time to consider who should be added this year as well. The committee met recently, and we have identified in the last 12 months 9 additional folks who meet the criteria, so they have been added to the database as well. So our database of potential honorees has been expanded significantly this year. Also, in the past, last year, I believe it was, this body was interested in commemorating Jamison, the founders of Jamison Door, because it was the 100th anniversary of their establishment. Based on that amount of, or that type of direction, we thought that maybe this body is interested in being aware of landmark or milestones that may be coming up in the future. Just so you're aware, this is the 100th anniversary this year of Armistice Day and the end of World War I. 2019 and 2020 will be the 100th anniversary of the passage of the Women's Suffrage Amendment to the United States Constitution. And the committee believes that next 2 years, some of their recommendations will reflect that particular milestone. This body adopted very rigid standards for being considered, which is in your packet as well, and the database is based on compliance with those criteria. The chart that you have in your package, which is several pages long now of potential honorees, those that are in blue are ones that have already been adopted and are no longer available. The ones that are in white and beige are the ones that are currently available. The ones that are in beige are the ones that this committee, or the advisory committee recommended for this year for you to choose amongst. They don't just give you the same number of recommendations based on the amount that they anticipate will be adopted, because the idea is the committee itself wants to give you a pool. They don't want you just rubber stamping their recommendations. But this body can deviate from those 4 recommendations and adopt anybody on this list that it chooses. So this year's recommended pool of candidates was George Leonard Fisher, who had a over 50-year military career, including some very unique accomplishments. He was one of a very limited number of people I've ever heard of personally who served in both the Civil War and World War I, which were over 50 years apart. Number 2 is Clara Hamilton. She was the wife of Governor Hamilton, who is heavily responsible for the development of the Oak Hill community in our city. Number 3 is Elias Recker. He was basically the first successful commercial photographer in Hagerstown and Washington County. And then 4th is James Dixon Roman. He was a congressman in the 1840s and was the president of the Hagerstown Bank. It was the the mastermind behind the plan that saved Hagerstown from the torch during the ransom in 1864. So they believe that this is the pool that you should consider for the 2 honorees this year. You're not married to only doing 2, but the past guidance has been, in order so we don't exhaust the pool too quickly, that you stick to 2 per year. In the last 2 years you've done that, but there's nothing obliging you to do that. The one thing that's different this year is we have pretty much exhausted the fronts of the pillars. So this year's, we're going to start on the back, unless this body believes we should start a 5th row on the fronts of the pillars, but the plaques would be down near knee level. I don't recommend that, because people are going to have to be literally bending over to read them. So we would be starting on the backs of the pillars this year, and the ceremony this year, instead of being out around the fountain, will be actually out in the grass in the back facing the street this time. So,
And when will that be?
it is standardly set the Saturday of the weekend before Memorial Day weekend, which I believe is the 19th this year, yes.
No wind this year?
I'm sorry?
No wind this year?
we're putting a change order in for the weather for that one.
Appreciate that, yeah.
And we're gonna make sure you have a podium too.
That'd be cool. Yeah.
So, but basically, your options are all of those in either beige or white on this chart to choose from, and the recommendations are the ones in beige.
I would just note one thing, Mayor. I don't have a strong feeling about it this year versus the last couple of years. I would note, though, there are only two on this list that looks like they were recommended in 2016, 2017, and 2018. And that would be James Roman and Clara Hamilton, for what it's worth.
Anybody else have any comments at this point?
I only make my same statement that I make each year, and that is, I think that Winslow Burhans needs to be up on that list of considerations.
And he's not on the list at all, right?
No, he's on the list.
He's on the
Yeah,
list,
he's
he's
on
not
the
on the
list,
page.
but that was like the first list that came out, right?
I have no problem with Winslow Burhans.
And you said that we could select
Yeah,
anyone.
Anybody in the beige or white, yes, that's correct.
And matter of fact, one of the things I like about Winslow Burhans is, you know, because of the criterion we have, which I totally understand and agree with, with a lot of these people, we really have trouble finding anybody living relatives. And you get somebody like Winslow Burhan, we don't have that problem.
And I like Clara Hamilton. I don't know, I just look at this list and I try and focus as heavily as I possibly can on people that I find in the historical context are more centric to Hagerstown. When I look at some of the names.
Contributed.
When I look at some of the names, they do stuff of a larger regional and national level, or something that's more recognizable to something that occurs outside of the city of Hagerstown, like the number of items for, like the Antietam battlefield.
Or I propose we do Hamilton and Burhans.
I'm good with that.
I'm good with that. They're also impressive.
Oh, yeah.
It's incredible.
So that's the decision, this body
Yep.
is
Hamilton, Burns.
Hamilton and Burhans. Okay?
Thanks,
Very
Steve. See you in May.
Every decade is a clock.
All right, Rodney, you're up. Stormwater utility fee study.
Good afternoon. Was follow-up to our conversation in November, and actually I look back, we started talking about this 8 years ago. But we are to the point now where we have written proposals in to do a rate study to set up a stormwater utility. And just to back up, especially for the benefit of Council Member McIntyre, the information that I've attached to this kind of gives you a background of the what a stormwater utility is. It's basically an enterprise fund that is set up to address the stormwater management issues of the community. Those issues could be anything from street sweeping to repairing storm drains to building new structures that clean the water before it's released into the streams, et cetera.
Curbs.
Curbs. You know, I'll talk about that in a second. It's widely done across the country. There's at least 1,600 of them that we know of. To develop this utility, what you do is a rate study, just like you do for water and sewer. And it determines how much money needs to be collected, what the anticipated expenses of the program are going to be, and it basically justifies the program. It's like a business plan for the program. The cost is going to go up significantly here when we receive our new NPDES permit, which keeps getting pushed back, but it's inevitable that I think it's going to be here this year. And basically what it's going to require, as we've reported before, is that 20% of the existing impervious area, the paved area, roofs, that kind of thing, 20% of the impervious area of the city has to be managed, and the water has to be taken clean somehow and then released into the streams and rivers that surround us. And the cost of that is estimated to be at $20 million. The general fund also currently funds some things that could be funded by this stormwater fee, and I mentioned before street sweeping. Some of Jim Bender, my assistant's time, he reviews stormwater plans and inspections that we are required by the state to do every 3 years of stormwater facilities. There are 110 of them across the city. So all that kind of thing that right now the general fund's paying for could be paid for by the stormwater utility. And as the mayor mentioned, we have an attorney general's opinion from about 6-7 years ago that all the curbs of the city could be considered a stormwater program. This fee could pay to repair and replace the curbs in the city, and that could be taken away from being the homeowner's responsibility, which it is right now. That's why we send out curb notices. So possibly we could get to a point where the whole curb and sidewalk program could be paid for possibly by the city instead of by the respective adjoining homeowner. But that's just a detail that has to be figured out through all this. So if you're ready to proceed, and this is a big step, I totally realize that, we have a recommendation of a company called AMEC Foster Wheeler, which is out of Chantilly, Virginia, to complete the study. The first phase of the study is $84,550, and the entire process is going to be between $150,000 and $200,000. That fee can eventually be paid for out of the stormwater utility. The time frame is we're going to kind of set this up that we're going to work through this rather systematically, because we feel that if we're going to be successful doing this, public participation is hugely important. We would recommend that we give you some names, that you appoint a citizens advisory committee made up of members that represent maybe just a broad range of people across the community. Because unlike a tax, which is just assigned to residential property, commercial property, this is a fee, and it would apply to every property in the city. So the people that would be receiving this fee need to be represented on that committee, and we would recommend that we work with them through this process and then also have public meetings and such before this would ever come back to you to implement. Yeah, and we're planning on doing public information meetings, having public materials on our website and such. I think that's such a critical component. I've talked to 6 or 8 communities that have done this, and they all tell me the same thing. If you don't engage the community, it's just not, it's difficult. So that's why the process is going to take a little bit of time, 1.5 years maybe, something like that. And we would recommend we just involve the community.
Do you associate this fee specifically with NPDES or also with your MS4 obligations?
Well, I would think both.
Because in my as we go through the MS4 obligations, we say, okay, here's your obligations to meet that 20%.
Right.
But there are, and I know folks out there, watching or whatever, even sitting here, aren't fully going to grasp this, but so MD's come up with this list of different ways to meet that obligation. Mm-hmm. It's this huge complex set of parameters that say, hey, town X, if you want to plant a bunch of trees, you get so much credit for planting a bunch of trees. If you want to convert septics to public sewer supply, you get a better sort of per acre credit by doing that. If you want to retrofit stormwater ponds.
You want to buy another street sweeper.
Yeah, or buy another street sweeper. All of these have different credits. So think of you're sort of at a parking meter and you're putting your money in the meter. A nickel gets you so much, a dime gets you so much, a quarter gets you so much. It's exactly the way this works. It buys you so much credit. And so, in our particular case, we found that the trees may not be the best course to take, that in the end, connecting folks from septic to public supply. The reason I ask that is because in the MS4, that's going to be a succinct sort of, at least for some foreseeable future, set of projects that the city's going to undertake. And when I see a figure that you put in here of like 210 million, I think is the figure.
Yeah.
And over that 10-year period, you're talking about 20 million a year. Never gonna achieve that.
Nope.
Just not gonna happen.
Right.
That's why when we had the conversation a couple years ago, I said, let's prioritize this and pick our biggest bang for the buck first.
Right.
And so for me, as you guys develop this, the reason I ask if you're gonna apply it directly to MPDES, which is just that blanket amount you gotta account for, or whether you're gonna apply it to MS4, which is, here's the specific items we're gonna do. In this analysis, I would hope that they apply to that MS4 sort of mindset, which is, here are the things we're actually going to do,
Yeah.
not here's a random round figure of estimate that we think it might cost us.
Absolutely. I think, coming up with those projects, coming up with those
Okay.
initiatives is instrumental.
And I hope our fee is fluid enough to move with those priorities, because we may think, hey, we're gonna go out and plant a bunch of trees and, that's gonna be the cheapest course to take, but the trees aren't gonna give us enough credit to meet the obligation, and we're gonna have to connect people from septic,
It's
which is 10 times more expensive, or we're gonna have to retrofit ponds, which is 7 times more expensive, and I just wanna make sure that as you deliberate on this, that you do it, at least from the outset, according to those projects you've identified,
Yes,
and not
absolutely.
an estimate of the lowest hanging fruit that you think you can get.
Right. Well, obviously, lowest hanging fruit is the ones we'll do first, but it'll be a whole palette of these things that we'll have to do to achieve as much compliance as we possibly can.
And I'm assuming, Rodney, the county is not interested in.
We did send a letter after we talked in July, I believe, and they said they weren't, but they are in the same situation, only worse than what we are.
They're not doing anything.
So once they
We're-
get the,
We're going to be enforcing, and I think that's what a lot of folks out there don't understand, is we're gonna be enforcing those parameters of accountability. I mean, that's what the directive says, on those county and state-owned facilities and impervious areas in our community. So, just as we talk about the churches or, other nonprofits, the schools, et cetera, not being exempt from this, neither are those governmental entities that have that impervious areas within our jurisdictional boundaries.
right. But what they'll all be eligible to do, everybody will be eligible to do, is get credits. So if you have a functioning stormwater pond, or especially if it has a water quality component, you'll get credits and maybe your fee won't be as high. But everybody, even property owners, would have that ability to do that.
I just don't want them to not do it
Yeah.
and then say, well, these parts of our stormwater system are interlinked and therefore we're gonna take credits for these, because then we sort of lose out twice.
Yeah.
We don't get the credit and we're the ones enforcing the fee, you know what I mean, to account for these projects that we have to do.
Right.
I don't want the county to be able to get sort of a double benefit.
Right.
By not
Clearly,
doing either.
Schools, county,
Right.
state, even federal was in the AG opinion that they, so I guess the post
But they're
office
subject to it.
is gonna be subject to it.
So you're looking for our approval to move forward on the first?
Next week I'd be, if you're ready to move forward, would be approving the first phase of the contract.
Everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Roger.
All right, next up is city volunteer fire briefing. Chief Lore, Captain Jimmy Sprecher Jr.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen. For a little bit of background, particularly for our new council member, the rest of council and the mayor knows we've been here several times over the last 2.5 years talking about fire-related matters. So back in the summer, we had a city-wide meeting with all volunteers in the city, administrative, riding, active, et cetera, and laid out some formal challenges and tried to solicit input of how we could move the system forward. The results of that July 30th meeting largely went unanswered. So when we spoke last here, I had laid out potential options for a 4-engine deployment model over a 5-engine deployment model, knowing that this would be our worst budget year for the city and knowing that the fire department would have to participate in whatever sacrifices were made there. I believe it was Councilmember Aylshire who asked that we communicate this clearly with any of the companies that were impacted or potentially impacted. And the city administrator and I, among other staff members, did that in late September, early October. We asked for a number of things out of that. We asked for a plan, et cetera, et cetera. And we have been, since that time, seeking answers to questions and possible remedies to the things we have. So that culminated in a volunteer briefing that we're having here today. And I just wanted to remind Mayor and Council, this was actually dates back to September and at your request. So before we get into some of the things that obviously are a little bit emotional, the media picked up on the packet, I suppose, Friday or Monday. There was a newspaper article here this morning. The audience is filled with people that are probably unhappy with this briefing. And I would ask Mayor and Council at the appropriate time to give them their due regard if they disagree with any portion of this. I will tell you that this isn't made in a snap decision, et cetera, et cetera.
Chief.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to make one thing perfectly clear. I'm here as a representative of the Antietam Fire Company. I don't represent the other 5 companies, and I'm here as a volunteer senior advisor. The fire chief and I communicate a lot. I've got 36 years of continuous volunteer service. So I don't represent the other companies.
Okay, Jim.
Thank you, Captain. I actually stole my thunder. I was going to introduce him as a longest, standing active volunteer member here today. So I would like to provide some good news to Mayor and Council about volunteers in the city and what we've been able to accomplish together in the 2.5 years I've been here. First of all, as you know, the volunteers own most of the facilities in the city. This largely started as a result of the consultant's draft report that was out in the summertime that the county initiated that was really pretty hard on our facilities. And I think the last time I was here, that was a point of discussion. So I want to provide them full credit because we continue to use their facilities all over the city. That's where we deploy from, but some of them are in an advanced state of disrepair and not compliant with current codes. We have enjoyed many minor facilities improvements, and we meet monthly. One of the things I want Mayor and Council to fully understand is that since my arrival in July of 15, I schedule monthly meetings not only with the career firefighters, but with the volunteer captains and presidents. We are religious about those. We engage in problem solving. We engage in things that are current for the Hagerstown Fire Department. And I have told them since day one, and I want the public to have confidence in this too. I'm not the career firefighters fire chief. I'm not the volunteer firefighters fire chief. I'm everybody's fire chief. And I represent everybody in the Hagerstown Fire Department, not just one side or the other. But make no mistake, I'm the citizens' fire chief first. And when I get to tough decisions, I'm going to make them based upon how does this affect the citizens of the people I'm sworn to protect. So we have continued to push efforts to develop riding volunteers, and we've seen some improvement in 2 locations. The Antietam Volunteer Fire Company, top of that list. Engine 1, who's represented here this evening, has made some strides this year where we've seen some improvement. Full disclosure, 3 of the 6 companies in my tenure here have made significant monetary contributions to the acquisition of our 2 ladder trucks and 1 of our pumpers in the fleet, and they deserve full credit for that. Now, let's see if I can get past this. Yes, sir?
On the, is that 13 separate volunteers, 28 separate volunteers?
It is.
Okay, thank you.
It is. So this is a roster of volunteers who logged at least 1 call in 2017. Now, among them, there is a volunteer truck one that ran 42 runs during the year. I think last year when I reported to you, it was what number of volunteers ran 5% of the total runs for their company, and it was a lower number. If you add those numbers up, we increased from the year before to now to about 50. That's some good news. It's demonstrable. I'll take any of that we can get. They're valuable members. We have to keep them growing, and you will see in my budget submission for FY19, money set aside for this group of volunteers, the ones that are running calls, and are trained and certified. It's interesting to note on the negative side that 3 of the 6 companies continue to have 0 active volunteers, which begs the question, what are we doing? We're just not making any progress there. So, I already talked about the July 30th meeting with all city volunteers in the city. It occurred on a Sunday evening, July 30th. I expressed my frustration with little or no progress from the monthly meetings over the previous 2 years. I stated clearly the budget time is here, and I was unwilling to submit a third operational budget that did not address some of the fundamental causes of our ability to deliver service. At that time, we were expecting the VFIS consultants report. That was the middle of the summer. We still have not seen a final draft of that. And then the larger question of where are the public dollars going? Where have they gone over the years, and where are they going today? I suggested we had to change with the times. A lot of emotion, little fact-based evidence at that meeting. I expressed again my willingness to support the volunteer system in the city. One of the things we've done since very early on is we conduct training on Tuesday nights, Saturday days, normally conducted by career staff or shift commanders, occasionally volunteer instructors that are designed specifically to include volunteer active folks to bring them along at a greater rate. We've had limited success with that, and in fact, in some cases, it's been boycotted. Some other questions that we have to address: where does public safety fit in the current economic and political environment? What is the best estimate here in the city for annexation, population, and boundary expansion in the next 5 years? All things I'm worried about as your fire chief, because I have to plan for that, and I have to make sure you can plan for that. Is some form of consolidation achievable? Well, this is a very emotional issue for the folks behind me. I understand their emotion, their ties to the past, and their willingness to celebrate the past, but it doesn't fix tomorrow. Would leadership, meaning volunteer leadership, consider fewer properly staffed companies properly located? And the answer to that is a resounding no from the folks. They want to continue to do what they've been doing for a long time. Now, I would declare that what I've learned in 2.5 years here is that the present governance model for fire rescue in Washington County, in my professional opinion, is grossly unfair to the city of Hagerstown. And I can back that up with evidence for how it's funded, the lack of ability to vote in the ESAC committee, which Councilmember Elshire has witnessed here most recently, and the ability to even get policies and procedures and things that we voluntarily comply with past our own county association. You have responses from 2 of the companies in your packet tonight of questions that were sent out. I was just handed a third from the Western Enterprise. It's somewhere in one of these slides that would say they're non-compliant. I just received an undated letter from them 10 minutes ago. Additional questions, what I would say, I could sum it down to 2 points. Lots of talk, no formal proposals, no plans. Beginning 2 years ago, I asked each one of these companies, presidents and chiefs, for their top 3 priorities, each of 3 years in a row. I had 1 company comply in 3 years. Pushback, deferment, dismissal of the issues, I think, is really what my experience with that is, and I think my command staff would share the same thing. So these are all initiatives I put in place. I'm not going to bore you with these. I stand by them, and I think that even the most volunteer opposed in the room would agree that we have done all these things together, and we continue to work through these initiatives. The problem is the city is not a real stakeholder in these conversations once we get outside of the city. So for the new council members, I've shown this map several times in public. This was 1914 Hagerstown, the rectangle. The irregular shapes that are colored in any color are the current municipal boundary. And what I would say is this, more than anything else, is the demonstrable need to change. We have got to provide deployment coverage to all our citizens, not just the ones that lived in that rectangle, which was, as you've heard many times before, based on the ability of a team of horses to run 8 blocks. It's really that old a deployment model. Now, modern times, this is what we do. The green reflects how far a company can travel in 1 minute at 33.7 miles per hour average. That is the RAND study that's used in any town USA. The yellow reflects 2 minutes travel time. The light brown, 3 minutes, and the dark brown, 4 minutes. And what that tells you is if we have to cut, redeploy, consolidate, whatever, we can appropriately cover this city with 4 engines. Now, I have said every single time I've sat with you here at this table, 5 engines will always be better. Can't argue against it. In fact, I don't want to argue against it. It is better. We have a high percentage of calls downtown. A downtown presence is absolutely the best service delivery we can provide. But if we can't afford that any longer, and if we are looking at staffing reduction and station closure and all these other things to close deficits, then it's my belief we also have to look at consolidation and some of the more difficult things that go. Cost savings are possible. Would they be immediate? No. Would they be a reduction in service delivery? Some. But if we put it in the right place, we could have a very effective deployment coverage. So I asked for action items in July. I asked for them in October. I proffered with more questions in November and December, basically requesting a plan. Tell me what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. Would you consider consolidation with facilities? Would you consider consolidation with any other of our partners, a county company, CRS, whoever? Would you operate your personnel, your active personnel, under central governance model? And open the floor wide open, any other ideas that staff and I have not thought about. Once again, no actionable items, no deliverables. So the results are what you have seen in your packet, plus a letter that I'll share with you after this from the Western Enterprise, which brings us to the end. 3 recommendations I'm asking Mayor and Council to consider. I would like you to invite the Volunteer Association leadership into a meeting to discuss governance and funding in the city. That will be a difficult conversation because it is a legacy issue that has existed forever. It's my assertion that the public dollars dedicated for fire rescue service delivery are not making it to the street. And I would not say that without evidence. Recognize that the city willingly and voluntarily has complied with Washington County Volunteer Fire Rescue Association standards and practices with reduced benefits. The city companies represented behind me tonight are zeroed out in 5 categories of funding by design, and the 1 category that they're not zeroed out in, they get half of what the county companies do. I declare that that is categorically unfair. It's unfair to the taxpayers of the city of Hagerstown, and I realize how controversial that is. Finally, if we can't make progress on bullet 1 or bullet 2, then I would ask for the support of Mayor and Council to declare that the city government is going to determine fire rescue resources within our corporate limits with or without the cooperation of the volunteer companies. Now, there's a number of things we could do, I believe. I won't tie up council's time this evening with that. I have Captain Sprecher here, who, as he said, for 36 years has represented the volunteers here in the city aggressively and continues to do so. But he's also been able to field the largest company of volunteers in the city. We have a plan in the FY19 budget submission to centralize authority for the operational riding volunteers under a single authority band, probably led by Captain Sprecher. I don't want to interfere with the bylaws of these individual companies. I don't want to interfere with their private funding models where they work to raise their own monies, but the public monies that are distributed through those companies, it is my firm belief that that should be controlled through this body and the appointed fire chief, whether it's me or someone else. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions. And
May I, Chief?
absolutely.
Mr. Mayor, as representing the Antietam Fire Company, I'm not here to advocate different funding models. I'm not here to advocate combining stations. Change is coming. Change is inevitable. We've changed apparatus, turnout gear, training standards, and we have to change our fire plan, the way we operate. By far, change is coming, and you have one of two options. Either you can be sitting at the table, voicing your opinion, your concerns heard, and have input in that change, or change is coming and you can have to accept it or go home. By far, I'd rather be at the table voicing an opinion.
I ran with CRS in the 60s, and I was vice president of CRS when Ronnie Horn was president. We moved from Franklin Street to its current location. And just as the chief has talked about these issues for 2.5 years and found nothing has been done, I go back to being vice president of CRS, which that move had to be close to 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, we were saying something has to be changed. The funding models are unfair. Everything is unfair. And so I guess the only message I can say is that what the chief is saying is accurate. It's going to be done, and what you're saying, Captain, I really appreciate. The question is who wants to be at the table and who wants to find out that they're not at the table. And for one, we are going to be at the table. So if the answer is from volunteer groups that they don't want to be at the table, then they won't be. But I would hope that they would be. And again, what can you say about volunteerism? It's the best thing in the world, and obviously you at Engine 2 have found a solution that others have not. And one who has had Engine 2 at my house on more than one occasion is appreciated as anything in the world when you make that call. And nothing that's happening here is going to be enjoyable for anybody at all. But you're right, Captain, when you say change is going to come. It's coming. It has to. We're about ready to embark on a budget very soon. I'm one of the few people that sit at this table year after year and say, okay, let's raise taxes. But there's not a whole lot of other people who are into raising taxes. And at some stage of the game, sensible decisions have to be made about how these things are done at every level. And I commend the chief because he's right. It's been, for 30 years, there's been a lot of talk and there has been no action. And I think that is going to have to end, and I think it is going to end.
I can tell you that one of the hardest things we had to do was move from Summit Avenue to the north end. I can tell you that I've seen a bunch of grown firemen stand in a fire bay and in tears when we were packing the last day to move from that old station. But it can't be about us. It can't be about me, what benefits me and what in it for me. It has to be for our citizens and what is the best solution, the best fire protection, EMS protection we can put out for them, so.
I would love to find a way, when I talk about budgets and lack thereof, I sure would like to find a way for somewhere, somebody, whether it be, the union or others, to find a way to have a banquet again. I think it is something that, me personally thought was very beneficial for the firefighting service for a whole lot of reasons. And if there's been any one single thing I've ever missed as a councilman in this city is that particular banquet. I thought it was a positive thing for everyone. But I don't know where the money comes from for that, when we have the discussions we're having right now.
Right.
So, first, let me just say, when I look at the numbers, you should be commended for being what I would argue now is the exception to the rule. I mean, you've got 28, roughly 28 volunteer members, and you won't find half the companies in this county that can post that number with any regularity out of the 27 volunteer companies. I sit on the ESAC committee. I've seen the numbers. One thing that you get is, after you've been around a while, is perspective. I think in 2001, when I got elected, we were talking about buying 2 engines, and we split the cost, if I'm not mistaken, 50-50. And they were about $500,000 to $600,000 at that time. And then when I became a county commissioner in around 2008, visited all of the companies out in the county, you see how deficient, and that's the right word, deficient, those companies are on available manpower, equipment, apparatus, and buildings. Just a reality, and that's the decision the county's made, over the course of its history. And, we fast forward here to 2018, and, sort of what I think I talked about then is now coming to fruition, and I believe we just bought 2 more engines, right? And those 2 most recent purchases were engines for about $1 million.
They were ladder trucks.
The ladder
Very
trucks. And so they're, in that case, the companies are able to put up, 10%, I think 10% of that cost, $100,000 apiece. And they're about $1 million piece of machinery. And that's a reality, I think, whether it's manpower, whether it's equipment, whether it's buildings, across the board, the 27 companies out there, for the amount of money that they're getting from public resources, whether it be city or county finances, isn't enough. It's not sustainable. I said in 2008, to anyone that would listen, to replace the fire system that exists in this county tomorrow costs $176 million. That's the number. If you had to put the adequate manpower, if you had to build all the buildings, if you had to put all the right amount of equipment in those buildings, that's the number. That's a real number. It's no different than 10 minutes ago when we sat here and we talked about stormwater management, and we're looking at $210 million worth of stormwater management fixes. That's the reality of governmental financing, sort of pushing those things down the line over time. And so now I sit here in this position, and I'm going to share with you just some brief comments about an email that I sent to Mayor and Council last week on this very issue, one that I sent to the chief in regard to my participation on the ESAC, and in relation to the fact that we sit here with a budget and we're facing a $2 million shortfall before we even see the budget at the end of March. Right, the end of March? Yeah.
Well,
And
we'll be before you before that to give you an update, but yes, officially the end of March.
And I point out to folks when they say, well, you're not doing enough for public safety, you're not spending enough on public services. And I tell folks all the time, we collect $28 million in property taxes. That's what we collect in the city of Hagerstown. About $12.5 million of that goes to police, and about $9 million of that goes to fire, or roughly about $24 million, or about 80%, of every property tax dollar we collect in the city goes back to public safety. That's the reality of our budget, and whatever's left goes to parks and roads and those little bits of things like economic development that we can afford. And what the city's doing is for about 36 cents, or roughly about 40% of its tax rate, it's covering the cost for a paid fire system. That's just the reality of the numbers. And when I look at that and I sit in these meetings, I express we have three options. And option one is that the city get recognized adequately by the county for a tax set-off. We get a property tax set-off of about 12 cents total if you're in the city. And what the county said back in 2008 when I was a commissioner, the reason that fire wasn't included in the tax set-off, and I remember these conversations very clearly, was the city was doing something above and beyond what the minimum necessary to do was, because the system's fine, the volunteer fire system's fine, without the paid side of what the city's doing. So the city's simply going above and beyond what needs to be done for the system to function properly. And that's why it wasn't included on tax differential. That's why it wasn't included on the tax set-off. And that's why it's 12 cents now. And I use this correlation. Annapolis, another municipality that provides a paid fire system, has tax set-off, and the tax set-off in that county is 50 cents. 50-cent differential inside the city and outside of the city. Annapolis, if I'm not mistaken, when I read their report, their system doesn't go outside of the city, much like Baltimore. And I give you these numbers. So if that's not going to happen, then our citizens aren't going to be able to make up some of that, what I'll call subsidized loss to the larger system as a whole for what it's paying to maintain a paid fire system. And the second option is if that's the way that the system's going to continue to operate, that the paid portions that the city taxpayers pay for fire service should no longer be extended beyond the city limits. Any part of the paid fire engines, any part of the paid fire apparatus, the equipment, the manpower, shouldn't extend beyond the city limits, because that's what the citizens of the city are picking up for, that the county says doesn't need to exist because it's already being properly provided for. So that's option two. And that's not a real good option. We all know that. We all know what would happen to the system if we did that tomorrow. It just couldn't function properly. But as long as we're going to do it, the county isn't going to press forward with any sort of immediacy to address those deficiencies that exist in the broader system well outside of the city boundary. That's a reality. And the third option, which isn't a great option and which probably spurred the discussion last administration for the union's pressure for a binding arbitration, was we turn it over. We can't continue as the city of Hagerstown to be basically 23% of the county's taxable population and be taking 40% of our city collected tax dollars and paying for a service that the state has clearly indicated is a county responsibility. We just can't do it. It would be like us taking over the educational system for the schools within the city. I mean, that's the most objective comparison I can come up with. And here's the reality across the state of Maryland. This is the reality. There's five paid fire systems across the state of Maryland. There's 157 municipalities in the state of Maryland. Only 5 of them have a paid fire system that the municipality provides a majority of those funds for, and clearly in a different context than how we currently do it in the city of Hagerstown. For instance, Salisbury, 3 stations, and they 14 square miles is what they cover for a population of 37,000 people. Annapolis, 3 stations, only in the corporate limits, and for a population of 40,000 people. And their total square miles is 10. Cumberland, 10 square miles, again, 3 stations for a population of 20,000 people. And I would argue that Cumberland's union functionality within that jurisdictional system operates much like ours, or most like ours of these 5, whereas the system of Salisbury in its operational capacity, i.e. a joint paid and volunteer system functions most like ours. Baltimore, Baltimore City is an anomaly when comparing the other four, because they have 40 station, 1,800 people, and 600,000 people. I mean, they're just, they're 1 per 350 residents, and the rest of us are at 1 for 550. That's the number. And then Hagerstown has 6 stations. Now 6 companies operating out of 5 stations. But we have double what those other 3 comparable entities in the state of Maryland that actually have paid systems operate as. And I don't know the dynamics, as the chief has pointed out here, in which one of those companies are able to sustain an appropriate level of volunteer capacity, an appropriate capability to afford what I would call are very necessary larger buildings and very necessary larger equipment housed in those larger buildings, and very necessary gear, turnout gear, and things like that for the folks that they turn out. But the fact is that as long as the city continues to provide that stuff on an increasingly larger scale, driven, frankly, by our collective discussions on our paid side over time, there's no inclination from the county to sort of come up to speed, so to speak, on those other parts of the system. There's no need for the Volunteer Fire Association for the county to press that issue in those other companies outside of the city, as long as they can manage the dynamics of where the workforce load goes, including the city stations. There is a complete dynamic issue with the unions that say, hey, you need to have this many people in these stations. Frankly, some of those same members that are union members and paid fire personnel for the city of Hagerstown that volunteer at some of those other stations that are volunteer stations, they're not at the county commissioners meeting beating on the table saying you need 4 at this station, need 4 at this station. They're volunteering in some places where they don't have drivers for 16 and 24 hours at a time. But I don't see them at the county meeting saying, hey, you need more paid personnel in here, you need bigger apparatus, you need more manpower. So everybody, all 3 of those groups, and that's why I said it the way I did the other week, all 3 of those groups seem to be just fine with the way things are running, as long as the city taxpayer continues to pick up that $9 million bill. And what I'm saying is we've got a budget where nearly 40% of our budget now is on that one particular item. We cannot continue to pick up that bill and function as a joint paid volunteer system the way we are. It just financially, for what I call the least able demographics of this county to afford to do so, to be able to continue to do so, because we just can't. Because as soon as you step outside of this city, the income goes up by about $20,000. The median age goes down by about 20 years. The housing value jumps about $80,000. I mean, I just can't look at that sort of smallest ball and say, you know, we're completely fine with you paying the most. It just doesn't work. The dynamics of it financially, it's simple math. It just isn't going to continue to work. So that's my 2 cents.
So I'd like the record to show there's been a lot of conversation at this table about automatic aid, mutual aid. The truth is, we receive as much automatic aid from the volunteer companies immediately surrounding us as we provide outside of the city. I volunteered in the county at a time when a ladder truck wasn't allowed to leave the city limits without a special request. I would never recommend we go back to that model. If you look at the Robin Wood Drive corridor as the prime example, county territory, to the best of my knowledge, every fire, and where there's been a number of large fires there, we've delivered first water, first personnel on the scene, followed quickly by county resources. We receive transfers from as far away as Waynesboro, Pennsylvania, Frederick, when we are all working in the city. Those companies immediately surrounding us provide much needed staffing and resources, but the truth is they're not available all hours of the day. I have not declined one automatic aid request. We have set engines in West Virginia, Hancock, Clear Spring, River Rescue at Sandy Hook, High Angle Rescue at High Rock. The city has deployed resources there. I'm happy to do that. That's the way the system should work. You know, when Mr. and Mrs. Smith is having the worst day of their life, wherever that is and whatever it is, and if we can assist in that, that's what we need to do. But, as Councilmember Aylshire points out, the funding model's got to reflect that. And right now, it does not. And I'm asking all of the folks to come to the table and have a really, really difficult conversation about how we get there. I think that, you know, in private conversations, since I've been here, I've heard it from political leaders everywhere, that sustainable revenue dedicated to public safety is our #1 priority. We have enough stuff. We need people to operate the stuff we have. People aren't cheap. If we can't fix it in the volunteer end of the thing, then we have to start looking at other options, whether that's part-time, interns, whatever. We have got to do something. It's my belief, let's not divide that volunteer career line right here. Let's just call them firefighters and paramedics. We set very high expectations for their performance, as we should. But they have expectations of their bosses too, and that is to make sure they can work safely in trained teams that practice together and can deliver service and make sure they go home the next morning. And that's my request as your fire chief. Mr. Mayor, I think you want to comment.
Speaking of paramedics, we respond on medical emergency calls, along with CRS when they finally show up. You guys are usually first on scene. But yet, we can't get reimbursed for that through billing. Only CRS can, if they submit and insurance actually pays, I mean. Is that correct?
And that's above my pay grade.
It is correct, Mr. Mayor. So there are a number of categories, everything from fuel reimbursement. Now, if I didn't say it earlier, I certainly meant to say it, that, look, when we're using volunteer-owned facilities, they should be entitled to receive utility reimbursement, funds to maintain those facilities, but they should be maintained to an acceptable standard, right? I'm not talking about taking that away. I'm talking about supplement that in a meaningful way that we can plan what this thing looks like next year, the year after, 5 years from now, long after Steve Lohr is your fire chief, right? We have just got to set the stage to be able to provide this service for the citizens here. One of my frustrations with the governance models that exist today, it discounts the fact or doesn't even account for the fact that if you add the call volume at CRS and the call volume of the HFD collectively, far and away, not even close to all the other companies combined in terms of demand for service. And I think Councilmember Aylshire has figured it out. We cannot continue to do that. We don't get any reimbursement for EMS first response delivery. We don't run every call. We run high acuity calls, not breathing, cardiac arrest. We also go at the request of CRS if they need help getting somebody downstairs, out of an apartment. That's the way the system's supposed to work. Let's figure out how we can make it work that doesn't break the bank and cripple the city of Hagerstown's budget, which is really where we are today.
Right.
$2 million operating budget. So I think, and I certainly want to acknowledge this group. You have been more than responsible and generous to your fire department in the capital planning, capital improvements project approvals to allow us to close some gaps with big projects from vehicle acquisitions or whatever. But operating, we're not even in maintenance of services. We just aren't. And I'm sorry to report that, but it's the truth. So we need to get the players around the table and really have these difficult conversations.
Well, Chief, what do you suggest? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think obviously, you know, everybody that is watching this presentation has, you know, heard our dilemma. I think that we can have a reasonable conversation about consolidation of operational volunteer assets. I certainly think that we have given ample opportunity for individual companies to recruit, retain, and train volunteers. It's not working. We just have to declare that we are at a point where, you know, whatever we say about that, we can't keep kicking the can down the road.
Are there no volunteers at Westwood Enterprise anymore?
I think the leadership's here, there are no active volunteers. They are very robust administrative volunteers who continue to raise funds and work bingos and those kind of things. But, you know, I would ask just a show of hands here. We have a lot of volunteers behind me. I'm not even sure who's here. Raise your hand if you have responded on a call on a fire truck, EMS unit, or staff car in the last 5 years.
Got
So
5
part
hands.
of the problem with that is
6
that there is no succession plan. You know, I'd like to think I have a very good relationship with the First Hagerstown Hose Company, well represented here tonight. We've had some really difficult conversations about facility and everything else. But one of the things that, you know, I continue to challenge the companies, when you're not here, you 4 or 5 people, what's it gonna be? And the way I view that, it's not a personal attack, it's not anything intended to be like that, but you know what? As your appointed fire chief, I own that problem then. What am I gonna do about it? And to the same degree, mayor and council owns that problem. So that's why we just have to sit down and figure it out and come up with a plan. I'm not talking about breaking a bank, you know, if this financial distribution sheet, so I'll just read by categories where the city companies are zeroed out. EMS fuel and maintenance, run EMS calls as the mayor pointed out. Fire apparatus testing, every other county, or county company is eligible for about $3,500 a year to have their equipment tested. Fire fuel and maintenance, $30,000. Response assistance, $25,000. And then, as we talked about in the operating allocation, the city companies earn half of what the county companies do. And we are the busiest provider far and away. That's why I have gotten to the point where this just isn't fair.
And that 25,000 figure, I think it's important for council to understand, based on the presentation we received from ESAC, phase 1 implementation the other evening. What's going to happen basically is the companies outside of the city that get that funding, that 25K, they got to blow through that to basically provide on-call service in times when they don't have somebody to volunteer to be there, right? So they go through that, then they are eligible, if I'm not mistaken, for that additional phase 1 manpower that he was talking about. This, not only will the city is not eligible now for that 25K, but the city volunteer companies, will not be eligible for that manpower to come to those stations, because the expectation is we're going to have paid staff there anyway. If we were to cut that out tomorrow, they'd have to figure out how to make those companies within the city eligible to receive those those county paid personnel to fill those times. And part of the reason that some of the companies, frankly, outside of the area that, you know, have that capability is because some of our guys volunteer in some of those companies in their off hours, and we have the necessary manpower most days, which is the hardest time to get the volunteers to serve most weekdays, to be able to back up those areas that can't find somebody to moonlight on those shifts. And I think that's the easiest way I can put it. And I think it has to be some degree of issue of
I would
fairness.
never recommend that we deny service to any citizen. I don't care where they are, right? That's not what we're about. And I certainly don't want to see this morph into that, which is part of the reason to have this tough conversation here, is we have got to figure this out. If the volunteers are not available during the daylight hours, and we are, and we can afford to park an engine at Hancock for the day, I mean this when I say it, I'm absolutely happy to do that. It's the right thing to do for the citizens. Is it a cost to the city? Yes. Should somebody else be sharing in that cost? My personal opinion, yes. But we just have not been able to move the ball forward in my tenure here. And I believe if you interviewed the 3 previous fire chiefs that preceded me here, they would all have the same story.
And Mayor, it seems to me there's 2 groups that need to be talked to. The most obvious ones that can solve the problem, unfortunately, it would appear to me, are going to be a group that we really can't even have any discussions with until 2019, and that's county commissioners.
Right.
Because who's kidding who? I mean, Shelley, if you want to talk about a good 2-by-2 discussion, it's this. But I can't conceive with the election coming up in November that you could expect any type of movement with the current body of county commissioners, and that's not a negative, it's just a fact. They got a budget coming up, and then they're going to have an election coming up. And I do think we have to talk to them, but I think what the chief is saying, we also have to talk to our volunteer companies. The solution is with the county, but that immediate solution is not with the county. And I would suggest that this type of conversation is one that is not going to be good at a work session, but we should have, we had a housing summit, we should have a fire summit, or a fire and rescue summit. And I mean with the appropriate people sitting down for a multi-hour session led by the chief that includes the elected officials and the volunteer companies and members of the professionals.
And
I don't know how else to do it.
And I think that we need to understand, a reasonable time frame. In other words, and I think you put it best, like, these things are coming, and whether we like them or not. I mean, back in 2010, during that election process for the county, people asked all the time, what's the biggest issue? I'd say, look, the 800-pound gorilla in this room is fire and rescue service over the next 10 years in this county. I mean, it just was. I mean, you go around and see the 27 companies, and it was glaringly apparent that they were not being recognized as the same level of sort of public service that schools and police and roads and things like those are. That's just a reality at the county level. And I think that reality continues today, but I think that Dave and guys over there are making strides to change that. And so I don't think that we shouldn't, recognize that. But for us as a city, if that's the type of funding we're going to be expected to continue to put up, and those are the type of budgets that we're going to continue to look at, we're going to need an answer from the county in some reasonable time frame of whether it's, because I remember back in 2008, the county was like, well, things are good over there. Let's just keep them operating the way they're operating. If that's the answer, then at some point we got to say as a city, okay, if that's the county's answer, then we need to figure out how to more effectively and efficiently utilize these city funds for the city-oriented, both paid and volunteer operations that we have in the city. Now, I don't know how else you do it. The only alternative to that is you say, okay, let's just keep raising taxes. I mean,
Or the alternative is get rid of a paid fire force, let the county handle it.
But you can't.
But when you talk
What I'm saying
about-
is, I don't think you got to.
Well, I'm
I don't
just
think you're ever
saying,
going to get a
that's-
council
I'm
that
not
has
saying
that
that's
ability
what-
to do that. You're not going to hand that type of system over to an entity that has no real interest in adequately running that system. The city isn't going to hand it over to an
Oh, I
entity that says,
understand that.
it's doing good by itself. And so I think the only alternative is we need to more effectively use the funds for city operations and go it in that course alone if we have to, or we raise taxes and keep doing what we're doing as we're doing now. And that to me, I don't think is the answer.
Let's not lose sight of the fact, please. Put yourself in my chair. The risk here,
thanks.
the risk here is different. There's no other high rises, sprinklered or unsprinklered anywhere in the county. We don't have 2, 3, 4, and 5-story brick walk-ups that were built 150 years ago with open stairwells. The risk here is different, and if one catches on fire, it's not a kitchen fire, it's a building fire, and if it's a building fire and we don't get there and deal with it, it's a block on fire. the risks aren't the same. And we just have to recognize that. I spend just about every morning on the way to work traveling in a different alley. And I would encourage mayor and council to do the same. If you look at these buildings from the rear and not from the front, they present a totally different perspective for people charged with going to emergency zone. And that's what our folks face every day. Now, I said at the beginning of this thing, I'm everybody's fire chief. I would be remiss if I didn't speak on behalf of the 77 employees in my department who feel they have no voice. And that voice has been controversial with this group in the past because they don't have a voice at the association. They don't have a voice at the Chiefs Committee. They don't have a voice in any of these other things, but who is providing the majority of the services? And I would ask you to consider that as well.
So are they permitted to serve as officers of other volunteer companies?
They are.
within the county?
In fact, many, many are. But not representing the career firefighters of City of Hagerstown, Maryland.
Mayor, can I just add one thing before we finish? You know, we've talked a lot about the budget, and we've talked a lot about a lot of things, and what we haven't talked about is the folks in this room.
Which I'm more than happy to hear from, by the way.
No. And
Today.
Well, today,
As you said at
I
the beginning.
no, I personally think the way to do it is it is a big session on that issue, but having said that, I look around and, a lot of people put in a awful lot of volunteer hours in this community, for their citizens. An awful lot of people, an awful lot of hours. And if anybody thinks they're not appreciated, that's incorrect. We're talking about money, and it really came to me when I looked around and saw Ronnie Horn back there. You know, Ronnie was a senior member when I was a young man running CRS in the 60s. And he went from volunteering to being chief for that, and I can tell you, when Ronnie was president, CRS had never had a greater financial problem than it did. It was as close to bankruptcy as it would ever be. It was very controversially, with the help of Mike Nye, who people hated, was brought out and moved to its current location. He was a professional firefighter and now is retired and a volunteer again. And everybody in this room is a Ronnie Horn, so to speak. And I just want to make that clear, that the talk about the volunteers like they or somebody else, they are what's made this community happen. The other downside of looking around this room is what the chief said. I hate to say it, but we're all old, every one of us. Minds may not be, but most of our bodies probably are, and that's one of the other concerns is where we're going when we run out of these heroes. Thank you. And I have no problem with hearing from people. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just saying we need to have a lot more than just a short work session.
Well, do we have anyone who wants to speak this evening while you're here? Or would you rather try to collect your thoughts and?
I'm Dave Stevens from Proposed Company, I'm president there.
Come on up with a microphone if you would.
Otherwise, we'll get yelled at.
What's that thing with the roll?
Yeah, I don't really have too much to say right now. I'm in agreement with the two councilmen. We need to have a sit-down with our volunteer organizations, one-on-one with the mayor and council, for us to have the opportunity to voice our concerns. We are looking forward for the fire department moving on too, but we have questions. You know, we're facing a major budget issue. We're trying to exist in the buildings we're in because, like you are, we all also do not have the funds to update our facilities the way they should be or to go out and build a new building. But we're all facing this issue with the fire department and funding, and the volunteer situation has not got any better. The training for the volunteers is more hours, more time away from families, friends, and your workplace. So the solution is a hard one, and it's a solution that we all need to sit down at, and like the councilman said, more time to talk on it than just a few minutes. And like I say, I respect Jimmy. I've known Jimmy Sprecher for a long while. I've been involved in this fire department for at least 42 years in one way or another. Chief Lord, I respect him as a very intelligent, smart chief compared to some of the chiefs we've had in the past. But we won't name names there, but you know, and I've been in the chief's office more than enough times, and like you said, we've had hard conversations. But I think the avenue to sit down with you all would be the best way to go. And that's all I really have to say, unless somebody's got something they want to ask me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm the other half of him. I'm the vice president. My name's Pam Stevens, and I'm in the chief's office a lot too. So,
Can you just tell the folks out there in TV land which company?
First Hagerstown Hose, the other half of him.
Yeah.
First Hagerstown Hose, whenever the chief has gotten to talk to us, I just want to go on record as saying that, and I thank the chief for saying this, that every time that we were addressed, we showed up, we gave our plan, we answered the 6 questions, and, you know, we know that the future might be different than we want it to be, but First Hagerstown Hose has a lot of history, and a lot of things have been asked of us. For example, simple example, the CAD system was asked to be put in there. Engine 1 went right away, spent $4,000, it's in and up and running. They asked us for this or that, it's done. So we're working with them. We just don't have the same vision of where it's going to end up. But I do want to tell you that in the letter that we sent, you should really look at the January to October. We've requested the November, December, January runs for fire and EMS from DES, and we're supposed to be getting the other half. Dave Hayes is going to get it, of course. But if you look at that, Engine 1 responds like in the 900 calls, far more than the other engines in the city. And if you think about it, you've got, me being a retired teacher, you've got Barbara Ingram, you've got University Systems, you've got Alexander House, you've got
The
Potomac.
UIP coming up,
Huh?
the UIP.
You've got the Board of Education that's going to be adding on. You've got Potomac Towers. You've got Seabrook's place down there. So you've got a lot of people in this downtown area that need help. And when they call, they need it now. They don't need us to come from far out into the city. We're there already. I know that one of the things that upset us is that we were always told since last spring, they want us out of downtown. Well, it got on my nerves after a while. Who's they? Who's they? Well, nobody would ever tell us who they is. And if they is the Maryland Theater, 28 South, Bulls and Bears, and all that, that's sad. The entertainment district, I don't think, is a good enough reason to shut down a city fire hall. And that's all I have to say. I'm a little upset about it. But we'll go on. Blaine should talk to you.
Blaine, you want to say anything?
Say one thing, maybe 2 things. I got 65 years in this. So there's a lot of stuff that's gone under the table. And the mayor and council, in reality, have helped us. They've never turned us down. No, they very rarely have turned us down. But as she said, all the things that are in downtown Hagerstown that are masses of people, and buildings, fortunately, don't start fires. People generally are the responsibility for it. And I appreciate what you said, because I remember filling out a paper and sending you, when you were a county commissioner, giving you this information, and I appreciate your in-depth study of the problem.
Obviously, the thing to do would be to snap your finger and have volunteers. That would really be great. But there are so many factors over the years that I have seen that have really affected the volunteer system. And you have some companies in the county that are hurting too. And of course, the county is trying this system to beef that up with additional hired personnel to respond in those areas and also to be drivers. Some of the county companies don't have drivers, actually, a simple thing. The volunteers are standing back there and they wait for a driver to get the piece out on the street. But I get a little passionate about with everything because the time at hand. It's a lot, it's not like I said, a snap the finger answer. And as you said, it requires in-depth analysis and study and the like. But, and also I want to say the county commissioners have been very good to us too, not only city council, county commissioners. And we've diligently used their money to really keep equipment up and do things. Thank you, I'm sorry.
Thank
Got a
you.
little further.
Anybody else?
My name is Ray Lushbaugh, Secretary of the First Hagerstown Hose Company. This whole presentation by both sides has been very informative, but the one thing I want to express is that you should go back to basics, basic thinking, okay? We're located centrally downtown. There's no other engine company downtown. There's no truck company downtown. So with all these buildings expanding, all these schools expanding and so forth, where are they going to get their help from? Or they're going to be dispatched from the outside of the city. Now, statements were made that it's faster to get in town than it is to get out. I don't know, that's almost an asinine statement when you're already sitting right there. How can it be faster to get in from the dual highway when you're sitting in South Potomac Street and your emergency is at the Maryland Theater or to the Barbara Ingram School or right around the corner? We've even had incidents where there's been calls to the Colonial Hotel, the theater, and Barbara Ingram, where the men actually walk down. Then you have to take the truck out. So I want you to think about that in earnest. And of course, I know they're going to bring up, well, we're thinking about moving a couple blocks away. A couple blocks is not feet. We're only feet away. A couple blocks could be the difference between life and death. And, you know, there's been articles in the paper where, well, why do they have to send fire trucks to medical emergencies and all that? Of course, the answer was, well, if it was you, you would understand. So put yourself in the place of those people downtown at the restaurants, at the schools. How fast do you want medical help? Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, so it looks like the next course of business will be, yeah.
Good evening. My name is Chaplain Rich Bauer. I'm the chaplain for Engine 4, and I wanted to just make a couple comments. I'm really enthralled with the passion that Chief Lure has. The passion of a young kid that grows up next to, down the street with Lure's produce and working. He's Hagerstown. But quite truthfully, you're asking him to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. The funding models have to be looked at. Question is Engine 4. What be willing to give? Well, we've bought trucks. We just spent $75,000 towards the new ladder truck. We're housing another one there. And so the point of interest is that when we're looking for people to assist, it is not helpful to have applicants come to the door and then the applicants are told, well, no, go down the street to the other firehouse. we have applications, and it wasn't the volunteers. I'm sorry to say that. Maybe they're looking to find a greater and easier, but we're not trying to look for volunteers. And indeed, pardon me, and indeed, we are supporting the Hagerstown Fire Department when they need a place for meeting or for large dinners. When they have an area for disaster relief, it's Engine 4 right there. To talk about moving Engine 4, let's think about what is it going to cost to move a fire department. Now, you're already talking about trying to maintain and keep a fire department going. Now you're going to throw in another functional problem. Moving cost. Has anybody calculated that? My answer right now is I want to work with the city. I'm the chaplain for everybody. And we have to be coming up, I think, with facing the reality of the revenue model is going to have to be looked at. I don't have the answer. I'm not a CPA. I'm just a chaplain. But I'd see these guys and I see the volunteers working, and they're working their hearts out. So please keep in mind that we are praying for you guys too, because you're not in an easy position. I know it. I served 3-star generals when I was on active duty. And it is tough. So please go away knowing that I'm very thankful that you are here, that you are working for the good, and remembering that the primary part of any governmental organization is for the protection and safety of its personnel and the people that they oversee. So thank you very much for allowing me to come tonight and for allowing me to voice. I feel ever so much better.
Thank you, Joe. Anybody else? Okay, so, moving forward, then we should put together a community meeting for fire personnel, volunteers. So we'll work on doing that with the chief and some volunteer companies. Okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you guys very much, and gals, appreciate it. City administrative comments.
Nothing this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Shelley?
No comment, thank you.
Lou?
Chaplain, thank you for your comments. I think we may need God more than we need a CPA to solve this. That's all, thank you.
Mr. Alshire?
I have one. So, I ran into someone who said, hey, I was at an office the other day, and the individual I was seeing at the office had a Rotary meeting and was talking about how the presenter at the Rotary meeting was from the City Parks and Rec office, and talking about a stadium and how the stadium needs to be downtown. And so I'm just curious whether we had city personnel recently at a Rotary. I think this person must have gotten confused with somebody else.
I'm not aware of that, I will find out.
Okay. All right.
Well, and for me, I will tell you that we have made a decision on a new council member. We will wait and do the same process that we did last time, which is wait for Donna to contact everyone tomorrow, and then we'll put a press release out naming that individual. So, no phone calls tonight, Kate. And that is it. Thank you very much.